Today's edition of the Spot Track podcast is presented by Bettor Edge. Visit bettoredge.com, grab the app in the iOS App Store, and use code SPOTTRAC, SPOTRAC, right now to get $20 on the house and get yourself cranking for wildcard weekend in the NFL. We're here. Plenty to get to in that regard. We're going to talk a little bit of football, a little bit of baseball, and then a lot of basketball because Keith Smith is set to join on the heels of the first big trade with my 10 notable trade possibilities to surprise Keith with. Guess what? I'm not going to surprise Keith because he is one of the most dialed in, prepared NBA analysts in the world, and he'll be coming up in just a few short minutes. Let's talk quickly with some baseball, or lack thereof, I should say. We had a decent-sized trade yesterday. The Cubs acquired Edward Cabrera from the Miami Marlins. We knew they were going to punt on some pitching in Miami. They had a surplus, and they're not quite ready to contend, though they are on the cusp of making some noise, I think, in 2026. There's some bats, both that they've developed and acquired, and they do have one of the better starting pitcher groups in the National League right now. So the Cubs benefit from that. Grab Cabrera, who has had injury histories, but look, this is an upgrade for them. There's no question about that. He's going to slot into that 3-hole, maybe even the 2 spot, depending on how things go here for them. This was an unnecessary move for the Cubs in what has been a quiet couple of months. They're not done. They're going to add probably an impact bat. I would guess one more starter, but maybe that doesn't happen until maybe mid-season. We'll see. He's got 3 years of team control left, I believe. Yes, 3 years of arbitration ahead of him. We've got him projected about $3.75 million for 2026. So there's value there. However, the Cubs gave up their number 1 prospect in Owen Cassey. So this was a big swing for them. I believe they gave up the number 1, the number 11, and then a 3rd player back to Miami. This is how the Marlins operate. They wait you out until they get exactly what they're looking for. So this seems to be, at least early on, a little bit of win-win. We'll see where this heads in the next couple of years, though, if Cabrera can stay healthy for a Cubs team that certainly needs a bolster to their rotation to truly, truly compete in the National League. So who's left? Because it's officially 2026. We're 5 weeks from spring training breaking, for those of you who follow that thing like I do. Kyle Tucker, still TBD. It's trending towards Toronto. I think most of the people that follow this thing believe that's where it'll end up. I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to the $300-400 million contract that many of us thought was going to be on the table. It looks like it's trending more towards maybe 3-4 years with opt-outs. We'll see how far that gets to. I do think Bellinger has a 4-year contract offer from the Yankees, the Mets, maybe a few others. And I think one of those New York teams eventually bags him. Alex Bregman to Boston just seems like it's a staring contest, and it's going to happen. It's just a matter of how, not if. But we'll see where that ends up. I imagine Detroit's still involved, maybe a few others. And then Bo Bichette is really an X factor. Rightfully so. I don't think he's a slam dunk top free agent, but he's talented. He plays power positions in the middle of the infield. Generally speaking, those kind of players do well in the open market. So maybe a staring contest them, maybe just a bidding war behind the scenes that we don't know about. There's a very real world where, because of the position he plays, he ends up being the top dog here in terms of overall guarantees. And we'll see where that ends up. But I would imagine some of the bigger contenders are still at least nibbling around the Bo Bichette conversation. And I don't think a return to Toronto is part of that process. So TBD on that one for sure. Then we got some pitchers. Framber Valdez remains the top dog here. The Mets are in. I know the Orioles have been busy. I think they're still in. I wouldn't count out any of these NL East teams at all. The Phillies, maybe even the Braves, who could use one more arm because of their injury history. And then, look, the Dodgers are going to strike somewhere with starting pitching. It's just a matter of how they're going to do that, whether it's via trade or one of these Framber Valdez, Ranger Suarez, and Zach Gallen, a player who's very familiar to that NL West, having been in Arizona for his career. So those are the names right now. There's certainly a really nice middle class, but this is the top list according to our system. We've got analysis on our free agent page for those used to looking for that kind of thing. And we will get a little bit more in the weeds with some of these numbers and possibilities as we approach those. But for the most part, I think right now we're into the cycle of free agent or the offseason for Major League Baseball that's more trade heavy. I do think we'll see a few more as teams sort of figure out what they have and haven't after the first wave has gone through. And then we'll get back to these big names. I think the Bellinger stuff and the Bregman stuff is really close. Tucker seems to be in, the typical, am I going big or am I coming all the way down to a system where I can get out of here after a year and then control this in 2027? It looks like he's having that conversation, which we've, have become kind of a constant with some of these free agents in the past 3 or 4 off seasons. So, we had this conversation, Dan Silverman and I, maybe a couple times leading into November, which was Tucker just didn't. I know the numbers said it. I know all the big people attached to the sport were saying this was going to be the preeminent, multi-$100 million free agent, and it just felt off. And it wasn't just that he had a weird finish to the Cubs season. It just felt like he didn't fit that mold. And maybe some of these teams are starting to agree with that when we get down to the actual dollars and cents. Okay, football-wise, we had some news. All right, literally moments after I wrapped the podcast Tuesday, that was 99.9% quarterback based. The Atlanta Falcons and Kirk Cousins agreed to a renegotiation. It's something I had written in the piece, which was the possibility that there could be some contract finagling in order to facilitate a move. My anticipation was that there was going to be a window where the Falcons at least attempted to trade Kirk Cousins. That appears to be non-existent. And by the way, it was non-existent this past offseason as well. And the big reason is Kirk Cousins holds that full no trade clause. And it seems as though he's done this everywhere, by the way, Minnesota, everywhere. It seems as though he has gone to the front office every single time and said, I do not want to be traded. I want to work with you on a trade. If you are thinking of moving on from me, I want to be released. And he does have that power. Okay. He has the power to say no to trades left and right, up and down. And that has been his mantra. So that to me is how we got to here, which is he agreed to renegotiate his contract significantly in order to facilitate what is going to be a post-June 1st designation, either on March 11th or March 12th when it becomes available. And the reason I'm saying that specifically is here's how the renegotiation works. He dropped his salary from $35 million down to $2.1 million. So you can do the math on the $32.9 million saved. That's important. That got moved into 2027. So Kirk Cousins now holds a $67.9 million salary in 2027, which, you can laugh and say it's fake, except as part of this renegotiation, they made it so that $67.9 million will become fully guaranteed on this coming March 13th. So that is obviously the line of demarcation for what's about to happen with Kirk Cousins and the Atlanta Falcons. So for all of you saying there's a world where he stays because Michael Penix Jr. and his injury history and his lack of production, it's not going to be on this contract. Okay. Yeah. There's a world where he returns because he's released. He walks out there. Minnesota offers him a minimum salary. Cleveland offers him. Pittsburgh offers him. And Atlanta says, look, we'll bring you back on 10 mil. Okay. But it's not going to be, a significant situation. And we are no longer managing through this contract. Let's put it that way. So there will be a post-June 1st release on March 11th or on March 12th. What does that mean for those of you who are kind of new to this? It means they will designate him with that release. He will become a free agent immediately. As soon as that designation hits the books, he can go and talk to other teams and have his way and figure out where his next step's going to be. Contractually, Kirk Cousins' contract that we're discussing here stays on the books until June 1st. Now, that was previously a $55 million cap hit, which is a lot of chunk to take on for 3.5 months of a player not being on your roster. So as part of this renegotiation, that drops down to $24.6 million, a very tenable number for the Falcons, who, like I said, gain that cap space immediately. It's already on the books now. And the Falcons now roll into, January with about $37 million of wiggle room. There's reserve contracts coming, and you know how the restricted tenders. So that's going to get whittled down quickly. But this was a significant step both for their ability to be powerful in March and allowing them to post June 1st designate Kirk Cousins, a move they were going to make anyway. So they carry the $24.6 million into June, after which the process officially happens. He's officially released, and Atlanta takes on dead cap hits of 22.5 for this season and another $12.5 million for 2027. $10 million of that, by the way, remember, is a roster bonus. He will be paid a fully guaranteed $10 million roster bonus on his way out the door, with the caveat of offset language. Okay. So if he goes and joins Pittsburgh on the 1.3 minimum, that 1.3 is subtracted from the 10 million that Atlanta owes him. So they'll owe him, 8 and change instead of 10. Now, he may go out and find a $20 million contract this season. I don't think it's likely, especially because of this offset situation. But if that's the case, Atlanta owes him nothing, and they'll be cap credited in 2027, et cetera. So that's just kind of the nuts and bolts of how this stuff works. This is becoming really common, especially with these larger contracts, with these guaranteed contracts. We're going to have a lot of situations where players have small guarantees built into 2026 as sort of like the buyout price, if you think about it in baseball terms. And this is going to be the case. The team is willing to lop off the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million guaranteed into a release, let the player go and find another team, hoping that they can bring back half of that guaranteed salary via offset language, and everybody kind of wins in that regard. So you're going to see it a lot. This is going to be one of the bigger examples of it with the $10 million guarantee. The Raiders with Geno Smith, $18.5 million. We'll see what happens with that one. But that's kind of how this is going to work. With Cousins specifically, they're going to go the 6-1 route because of the $35 million dead versus the $24.5 million cap hit. So they would lose significant cap to just outright release him in March versus take this post 6-1 designation. But it's a compromising renegotiation. It works for both sides. Cousins gets to pick his next team outright versus having to facilitate a trade. And the Falcons get to carry a tenable cap hit into June before they process that 6-1 release. And Cousins, in one way, shape, or form, will make that $10 million at least for the 2026 season because of the guaranteed roster bonus. We'll see what's next. He hasn't let us down contractually in a long, long time. We'll see what's next for Kirk Cousins on the open market. I gave you a couple of teams I'm thinking about. There will be maybe a few more once we get through the first round of cuts and cap casualties and all that good stuff. And speaking of which, I will do a larger pod, both on the Spot Track podcast and I think with a couple of partner Bills podcasts that I'm connected with, discussing the Buffalo Bills, who are the recent offseason preview that I just launched this morning. For those of you who have been following this, you understand the structure. I go through the cap space situation, the draft pick situation. I throw out some offseason questions that I can think of or that I've ascertained. I'll give you the top free agents for the Bills this year, including market valuations in our system. And then I'll give you fifth-year option decisions that are happening, that are approaching in May, potential extension candidates, including our valuations for all those players that I believe are on the roster bubble, including all the ramifications. And then kind of new this year, I'm projecting salary cap conversions. Okay, so if Josh Allen enters 2026 with $55 million in change on the books, how much can be freed up if they convert that to signing bonus, et cetera? I've got 4 or 5 players for every team that can free up space. So if you do the quick math, you can take their starting cap space and add on the millions and millions that can be freed up with these conversions and take it from there. So I'm trying to lay out the offseason as best as possible. By the way, you can take everything I've projected here for these offseason pieces, go to your favorite team on Spot Track and click the Manage Roster button. We do have a manager tool that allows you to do all this. Process cap conversions, trades, add free agents, franchise tag players, the works. So if you want to go and kind of be an armchair GM with your favorite team, that is live now for 2026 on Spot Track and available for each team 1 through 32. We'll talk more about this, like I said, in future podcasts, especially depending on what happens this weekend with a couple of teams. But I'm continuing to crank out both these and some offseason stuff. We've got to talk about some top 50 free agents really soon. That list is formulating both in my head and on paper. So we'll get to that probably next week early, especially with a couple of teams falling by the wayside through the wild card weekend. Let's get to some basketball, some really notable basketball with Keith Smith. All right, Keith, we kept you busy all night because the Atlanta Hawks finally pulled the trigger and moved Trae Young to Washington, kind of as expected. That's sort of what the tea leaves and the breadcrumbs were telling us. Just initial thoughts. No grades, please. We are not a grade system. But just your thoughts about the teams that linked up here, the Trae Young era in Atlanta, obviously the parts that moved and the financials that go along with that.
Yeah, let me start by saying not having to write trade grades and just analyzing trades is one of my favorite parts of working at Spot Track. So this is it's an interesting deal. This is a spot where for the Wizards, you on its face, it's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you adding $90+ million? And why are you trying to get better when you're not very good and you have this protected pick and all these other things? But at some point, teams have to exit the rebuilding phase and start to move towards whatever is next. And that's the start of this process for Washington. I think Washington looked at it and said, we have a chance to pounce on a player we can't acquire any other way. We're not going to be able to sign a guy like Trae Young until we're good, and we may not get good unless we have a guy like Trae Young. And I think they looked at it in very much over the last couple of days. It became clear they weren't just interested in Trae Young as a continuation of taking on salary for draft capital and the like. They were interested in Trae Young as a basketball player. They believe he is still a good, productive player, which they should. This guy was an all-star last year. He's one of the best passers, playmakers. This year's been rough, but he's had injuries. There's a lot of, I don't want to say turmoil with the team, but just a lot of changes with the Hawks this year. It's very clear the Hawks are going in a different direction. So from the Wizards side, I like them getting Trae Young. I think he's going to help them. I think he's going to help their young players just by making the game easier on them, by putting them in good positions. CJ McCollum was having a nice year, but CJ McCollum's not a playmaker. That's not what he does. He's a primary scoring guard. And then Trae Young will come in and be able to set guys up and just make life easier on them. I know that a lot of people are saying, well, and they'll sell more tickets and all that. I don't know who, that could be how it plays out. But I think basketball wise, this is a good acquisition. Salary cap wise, it doesn't really do a whole lot to change anything for the Wizards. They were going to have over $80 million in cap space. There's not $80 million of free agents to spend it on.
Not to Washington, as you noted, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. If it was the Lakers had $80 million, we'd be having a different conversation. But Washington, and they also only had 3 roster spots to fill. So $80 million for 3 roster spots starts to get to be, wait, are they even going to get to the salary floor? Like, how are we going to make this happen? And there's only so many bad contracts you can eat in the league for draft capital. So they use a little over half of that for Trae Young. That's fine. They still have $40+ million because they got off Corey Kispert's contract in this as well, which has a side benefit of they've got a lot of young wings on that team. And Corey Kispert was a good player getting minutes. So now those minutes will go to their young guys. So all around, they don't lose any flexibility. Hawks side, yeah, all right. You went with McCollum, who's going to be helpful for the rest of this year. Again, having a good year as a shooter scorer. He's basically been what he's always been in his career, and I think he'll be helpful in Atlanta in a role where he doesn't need the ball all the time in his hands. He's used to playing as a secondary guy, so he'll play off Jalen Johnson quite a bit more. He'll do a nice job in that role, and then they get Kispert, who will be a nice bench player for them on a fairly fair contract over the next several years. So I think it was good for them. And they also create rare trade where both sides create financial flexibility, but they did as well. The Hawks are now in position to have somewhere between $25 and $30 million in cap space next summer. Now, there's a lot of ways that could go. They could keep Porzingis. They could keep McCollum. That would eat into that cap space. But it's the flexibility that they have that they would not have had with Trae Young.
Okay, so just reading some of the reporting out there and the analysis, obviously, it sounds like this is just part one of Atlanta's trade deadline. Okay, so explain to me then how taking on McCollum, taking on Kispert, doing what they've done leads to Anthony Davis or leads to another big name that sort of fits the mold of this new Atlanta Hawks structure that Trae Young no longer fit.
Yeah, so this is where I'm going to pump the site in our trade machine. Everybody hop on there and start playing because there's a lot of ways to get there. And It's not going to involve CJ McCollum. I've seen some already people writing like, well, maybe McCollum and another player go for Davis. They can't reaggregate McCollum in a trade. They can trade him again by himself, but they can't combine him with like Luke Kennard, and that's $40 million of outgoing salary. So, but they can't trade Kristaps Porzingis. And one of the things I always say is when you trade $30 million out, you're usually going to take some kind of hit. But he's missed so much time for Atlanta that it's almost like you're trading him without losing a lot of on-court production because you haven't had him very much this year. Now, would Dallas want Porzingis? Probably not. I don't think they want to relive that. But that's where you get a third team involved. You get Utah or Brooklyn or one of these teams that's miles from the salary cap jumps in there as a facilitator, and they take on Porzingis, and that's kind of how it comes together. The sticking point, at least today, to some extent, seems to be the inclusion of Zachary Rissache in the trade. The Hawks don't want to move Rissache, which they shouldn't. He was the number one pick just a couple years ago. They obviously would like to keep him. And Dallas is kind of like, well, you don't have a whole lot else that we want because the Hawks are not super flush with draft capital because they're not going to give up that Pelicans pick that's coming their way, or potentially the Bucks, but it's going to be a good pick either way. They don't seem very likely to include that in a deal for someone like AD. So that means you got to get there other ways, and that means you're going to have to give something. But just like we saw with Trae Young, there was rumors as early as yesterday morning that they were going to have to give up a draft pick to get off Trae Young's contract. They didn't end up having to do that. So now maybe they will be able to stick to their guns and say, we're not trading Rissache. We want to keep him, and we go forward from there. So that's how you get there. And then long term, now you have Anthony Davis, 50 plus million over the next couple of years with a player option. And he's in a position where he wants an extension. Well, if you had Trae Young, now you're dealing with Davis and Young. If you extend both of them, you're probably talking $100 million between the two of them. You already have Jalen Johnson and Dyson Daniels and Onyeka Okongwu under contracts. Rissache, if he's stuck around, that's another semi-sizable contract because he was the number one overall pick. And all of a sudden the Hawks they're going to be an apron team when they've been a reluctant tax team in years past. So now with Trae Young out of the mix, you can kind of you can basically re-pursue that max salary slot without the worry of, all right, now we're going to be pushing up against the apron. You'll be more expensive. Maybe you'll be kind of dancing around the tax line, but they've done that dance for years.
The draft pick situation. You and I kind of went back and forth on this, and it ended up being a null and void with this Trae Young deal. Absolutely nothing included. I know this says something about Trae Young. Okay. And by the way, the fact that he's basically on an expiring contract, with the player option next season, it's iffy. It's 50-50, but you can ascertain it that way, sort of. What's the make here, though? Because the Luka Doncic situation, which was not ripe with draft picks, in comparison to where we were with Rudy Gobert and Miles, and Bridges in New York, and all these moves that were blowing us away with draft picks included. Are we just getting better with this? Are teams just saying, this is ridiculous, we are losing too much value in what we're doing here, even though the trade it's just going to continue to happen? I went down a list of draft picks from 2018 just because the Luka and the Trae stuff. Keith, I couldn't even scroll far enough to find a player who has not been traded from that draft class. Everybody's
it's
traded.
Crazy.
Everybody in the league is traded at some point in time within a 5 to 7 year window. It's just the nature of the league. So having said that, our team's just saying we can't be forging 3 to 4 draft picks every single time we do this. Is that what's happening here?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that on both sides, right? So Trae Young if the Wizards had given up draft capital, we'd be starting this show by killing them for doing that because you're not in a position to do that, right? I am a firm believer that when you're giving up draft capital to trade for a player, it is either this is a once in a lifetime shot to get a player this good, or it is we are getting the final guy to make us a finals team. And if you're doing that, it's hard to argue, right? I mean, as much as we all love talking about cap space and future planning, the goal is still to win championships, right? I mean, that is presumably why we play the games, is to win titles. So we're in a spot where, for me, I am like I said, a firm believer in be more cautious. And I think teams are now in this apron era are coming around to the idea of, hey, if we are going to go get a player and we're going to be expensive eventually, and we're going to be an apron type team, and we're going to have restrictions on getting the next guy and the next guy, we have to keep our draft capital because we need to be able to get guys that way. Like that's where I think teams are now more reluctant. And then on the Hawks side, not wanting to throw a draft pick in, they held firm and said, hey, if you want Trae Young, like you're not getting a pick with them. I believe we're in a position where it is, if it was going to be, we need a first round pick from you or no deal, the Hawks would have said, then no deal. We'll just figure it out with Trae Young ourselves. So they're not willing to give up because, again, this is a team that may, let's say they do turn around in the next few weeks and trade for AD. Yeah. If they do that, they're going to be expensive and they're going to need their own draft capital. And it's, as much as we've all been kind of seduced by, man, the Hawks have that Pelicans pick and what a great pick that is. And they're going to have another pick this year. They are out other picks down the line because they owe picks to the Spurs from the DeJounte Murray trade. And that's a real example, I think, of kind of learning your lesson of maybe we shouldn't have given up those picks for DeJounte Murray, who, by the way, kind of to your point, is he's no longer on the team either. He got traded off already too. So that's where you really kind of start to land in these positions where teams are just being a little bit more careful now with their draft capital, which is, it's interesting. And you're going to, I think, we'll see what happens. I don't want to spin us off onto that tangent, but if they make further draft reform, you may see even less draft picks get traded because teams may be like, well, wait, if I can't lottery protect this or top 10 protect this pick, I might be even more reluctant to move those draft picks. And that, I'm not going to say it's going to make trades harder because this is where I use the Jurassic Park line of life finds a way. But it like teams will find a way to make trades, but it'll just look a little bit different than it is as far as, hey, we're going to pay you with 4, 5, 6 draft picks and swap rights and all that stuff. Last thing I'll say on that, the Luka trade that's absurd that there wasn't
a 101,
but that's we're a year past litigating all that.
The only thing crazier than the Luka trade is the Trae Young for Luka trade, right? I mean, those are the two in hindsight that stand out, especially this time of year. All right, let's go rapid fire because that was a hell of a breakdown here. And by the way, I have tangents to go on, but we'll have to serve that for a different pod because you really piqued some interest there with where things are headed financially with the NBA that I think is actually a positive thing. But I'm gonna keep my mouth shut right now. We'll have a bigger podcast later. Ready? Rapid fire.
Trade deadline.
There you go. Do you think AD is moved? Because that is the name right now, right?
Yeah, it's
Why
tough.
Why do they do this though? Kind of getting 90 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, so anytime you're going to give me a $50+ million star player, I'm going to say the likelihood is less that they get traded. And that's where, like, sorry guys, I'm a wet blanket on this stuff, but I live in a hyper realism world where this is where just because it works in the trade machine doesn't mean it actually works in real life, kind of thing. But I also believe when there's this much smoke, there is fire. And I think Dallas is kind of in a position where I think what's going to drive this more than anything else is, are the Mavericks going to hold firm on, we're only going to go to X in an extension, or we don't even want to talk extension yet. Let's talk it later. He's not extension eligible to the summertime, but they let's be grown-ups. Those conversations are happening today. And if they're going to hold firm, you better believe Rich Paul and Clutch Sports are going to try to get him somewhere who is, hey, July 1, what is it you want? Great, done, let's go. Or whatever timing it needs to be post a trade, because maybe it's 6-month restriction and all that on extending AD. So, but whatever time we can do it, we all know we're just waiting for the date, much like how it went down with Luka and the Lakers. They had to wait till August, but it eventually got done. So I think that's what's going to drive this more so than it's AD or anything like that. Yeah, Dallas would like to keep him and see what it looks like with him and Cooper Flagg and Kyrie Irving. But I think they also realize, hey, we may have a chance here to really add some good stuff going forward as we kind of reorient this team. And it's another one where AD's missed a lot of time. Yeah. And they for that reason, are they reluctant on trading him? So I would say this one's very 50-50. right now it's going to take the right team putting the right stuff on the table, but maybe it does go down, but we'll see. I'm not sold we're going to see an AD trade now, but put a pin in it because we may see an AD trade over the summer.
This
I think
summer.
it's going to be the same kind of thing. I'm probably stepping on another guy you're going to bring up as Giannis, but that may be, we may see the groundwork laid now where it's just too difficult to get there, but then that reopens when we get into June and July.
Yeah, I was going to package two together for you because I think they're extremely unlikely based on how things have shaken out here. It's Giannis and LaMelo. I don't think either of those guys can move right now, maybe not even in the summer, because things seem to be sort of working out a little bit for their respective teams.
Yeah, and Giannis is a whole story of itself where it's very clear that unless he says to the Bucks like some version of the words "I want traded," they're just not going to do it. And for them, I don't blame them. He's their franchise guy, right? It's at this point, I've had people argue it's still Oscar Robertson or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but for any today NBA fan, Giannis is the best player in the history of the franchise. Like those other guys, incredible legends, but Kareem wasn't there very long. And Oscar Robertson, I think Giannis has surpassed him at this point. So I think we're in a spot where it is, just incredible, what he means to the franchise. And it's just hard to trade a guy like that. Then somebody like LaMelo, interestingly enough, Trae Young going to the Wizards kind of hurts a little bit there because one, they got a decent return and they didn't have to give up draft capital to move Trae Young, but there was no overwhelming return. So teams are going to be like, hey, because teams are going to ask the very real question, is LaMelo Ball even as good as Trae Young? And a lot of people are going to say, no, he's not. He's,
he's
it's
a
hard.
playmaker
So
with less scoring, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think in quite frankly, far more injury issues than Trae Young's ever had in his career. This year's the first year he's really kind of been hit by the injury bug. LaMelo's had just about every year he's been dinged. So that's where I think for him, it's going to be, we got to wait. Now that could all change if a point guard goes down somewhere and a team is really there. Because if you go through the list of teams that need a point guard and now take Washington off the list, it's not very many. And the ones who do are not in position to trade for a guy who makes nearly $40 million a year.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Houston can barely move right now. Okay. So I think at the minimum, those are probably summer moves. We'll see. Man, speaking of point guards who have no traction, what do we do with Ja Morant, Keith? And the whole idea of Ja Morant as a player or a trade asset has just quieted down to nothing. So what do we make of this? Because there's a world, I did some quick and dirty, in-season work here. There's a world where Memphis just guts this thing. And they're looking to buy, sell low on Jaren Jackson, who has become a shell of himself for some reason. There's just a lot of misses. Zach Edey can't stay healthy all of a sudden, right? It's a lot of bad in Memphis. What do we do with that team?
Yeah, I think these are positions where this is, let's see what we can make of the rest of this season, and then we'll look at it this summer. And if they continue to hover around or just below 500 and they're a playing tournament team and they're out, and don't even make the actual playoffs, you're going to see changes in Memphis because you have to. You can't, this gets to the point of you can't just keep banging your head against the wall with essentially the same team. And they've done some of it where they moved Desmond Bane already and they've kind of reoriented parts of the team, but you're going to have to do more. And that's where it becomes, all right, what are we doing with Ja Morant and with Jaren Jackson Jr.? Are we going to be in a position where we're finally going to move these guys? That's going to be probably where this goes.
And they're distressed assets. So you're selling low, right? At least right now, most likely in the summer as well. So it's going to be an ugly turnaround for that Memphis squad that, man, had a heyday for a minute and a half, but it has gone south quickly.
Yeah, and that one's hard too because those two guys especially are this city is super attached to both of those guys, and that's one where you kind of have to get it right because if you're the front office and you trade them and you blow it, you're not the one rebuilding the team. You'll be following them out the door just a handful of months later.
All right, let's steer positive. Michael Porter Jr. in Brooklyn. We knew he had this in him, and he has shown this in Denver that he can be not just a sit there and shoot kind of guy, but an actual playmaking scorer, an actual creative scorer, and obviously a lights out 3-point shooter. He's uber attractive right now, but is anybody actually buying this sauce, Keith? Are they going to give up what it takes? And I'm speaking to contenders here to bring in this guy and drop him in your lineup for the next, whatever, year and a half, whatever it may be before they flip him again, right?
Yeah, I think the idea with Michael Porter Jr. is there are teams that do we need, like Detroit has been linked to him. Detroit, very clearly, if you watch them, can use more shooting and scoring. Like there's too many nights where even when they win, it's Cade Cunningham having to do a whole lot. And I think the Pistons, as much of Michael Porter Jr. would help in the playoffs, I think this would be as much of, hey, get us through the rest of the regular season before Cade's on his, on wobbly legs by the time the playoffs start because he's, worn down from having to do everything. So, and they have the path to get there. They have Tobias Harris's contract. They play the same position. I don't think anybody would argue that Michael Porter Jr. is not a better player than Tobias Harris. I think everyone would agree with that one. So I think you're in a spot where, okay, let's, we could, if that's where we go to, the question becomes, are the Nets going to hold to, we need Ron Holland, or we need multiple firsts, or we need, Asar Thompson. Those things are probably not going to happen. So if it is, all right, give us Harris and somebody else as a salary matching component, all right, we can get there. Let's get this done. And that's going to be where it is. Or is there another team that's sitting there kind of looking around and saying, we've kind of got a contract. We can put in a deal to go get a guy like Michael Porter Jr. because he can really come in and help us. And I'll say this, whenever he comes up, there's a lot of people who's like, who cares? Like I could put up numbers on the Nets and all that. I am a big believer in the good stats, bad team guys. But that's when they're like inefficient shot chuckers. Michael Porter Jr. is one of the more efficient scorers in the entire league. Yeah. And you would hope that goes up as he plays with better players. That can maybe the scoring numbers come down a little bit, but the efficiency could be even better on a good team. Yeah, he's probably not going to average 25 a game on a team like the Pistons. But if he's at 20 while still being really, really efficient, well, now all of a sudden that's exactly what you wanted out of him.
I like Minnesota a little bit too there. More than a little bit, actually, but they're tough. They're stuck, man.
Yeah, they're so close to the second apron, and it's the same thing with them and the point guards, right? Everybody wants to get them a point guard, and they, by all accounts, were interested on a handful of the different point guards that have been available, but their problem is they do not want to trade out 3 or 4 players because they know part of what has them, playing well and being a good team is their depth. They're not willing to become like a 5 or 6 man team. They want to stay solid, 1 through 9 or 10.
All right. I'm staying positive, and I'm happy that this is a positive one. How about Zion? How about this New Orleans team right now? It's been a roller coaster, but it hasn't flatlined yet, right? There's a lot of good happening there. They've made some draft picks that have made impact. That's been a minute since that's happened. And they've got 3 to 4 names right now that teams are at least calling about softly. And I do think Zion is one of them. We have this conversation every 6 months, Keith, and there's a different status every 6 months. Where are we right now with Zion and New Orleans or possibly leaving?
Yeah, I think he, as long as he continues to stay on the court, he's pushed his value back to neutral on that contract. There are teams, I could tell you, I've talked to teams that are like, hey, we see him as positive value because if it all goes sideways, we just waive him and whatever money we got off. And that will probably determine it. If New Orleans is willing to trade Zion and take on a contract that goes maybe another year or two longer, then they're in a position where I think that something could get done there. That's going to be the challenge. Are the Pelicans open to the idea of, all right, we're going to reorient around our kids and we're probably not going to be very good for the next couple of seasons, but we're just going to kind of grow this a little slower. We'll eat a contract. Could be a way to recoup some draft capital after they sent out, the pick to move up for Queen. If they could pull something like that out, then, okay, that's where it makes a little bit more sense. As far as other guys on the Pelicans like Herb Jones and Trey Murphy, don't even call unless you're starting with multiple picks. To go back to our conversation at the top of the show, those are the kind of guys that the Pelicans are like, hey, we need 2, 3, 4, a combination of 4 assets in terms of young talent or draft picks, because those guys are young enough. They're on good contracts where we can keep them and just grow them around queen and fears as we become whatever we're gonna be. But yeah, they're an interesting team. They've played better. They're now back to losing games again, which excites no one more than the Atlanta Hawks. But it's just in a position where it's. I mean, the Western Conference is tough, and they're playing better. Guys are healthy. Guys are doing things, and I've said this for Pelicans fans for a while. Just stop worrying about the draft pick. I know I've ripped them for it up and down too, but what's done is done.
Yeah.
Just focus on the development of the players on your team, because at some point that's all you kind of have left.
Okay, the list is dwindling here, and it's, man, I feel like it's the same names year after year, Keith. But here we are, right? We've got Zach LaVine as a potential move out of Sacramento. We've got Lauri Markkanen as a potential move out of Utah. You can kind of take your pick on this. Cam Thomas probably should move out of Brooklyn finally. What happens to these players who I feel like are annual maybes and never seem to really get it done?
Yeah, Cam Thomas is the easy one. Any team that needs bench scoring will be able to get Cam Thomas because he doesn't make a lot of money because he signed the qualifying offer. So just about anybody in the league can trade for him with relative ease. The challenge with Cam Thomas is he has a no trade clause. So it's going to have to be somewhere where he is okay with losing his bird rights to go there, because it's either going to be, all right, I'm going to go there for the rest of the season. I'm going to play a big role. I'm going to build up my value, and then I'll hit free agency and we'll go from there. Or it's a place where, hey, even though we don't have your bird rights, we have the mid-level exception, or we have cap space that we can re-sign you with later and get you kind of paid. Because that was the issue with the Nets. He wanted money that the Nets just weren't going to offer him because of the direction they're going in. So Cam Thomas kind of controls that process. But yeah, I kind of think we will see him find a place where he's comfortable to go to. Markkanen is interesting because the Jazz have a lot of interest in him, but the Jazz have set an extremely high asking price. This is the last year the Jazz owe that protected pick from the Derek Favors salary dump of all things to, of course, the Thunder. So it's once they're done with that obligation, they intend next season to start moving things forward. They like the way a lot of their young players have played, especially Keontae George, who's taking major steps forward. He's been fantastic. And they believe, hey, Markkanen loves being in Utah. Anytime he's asked about it, he talks about how much that's the only place he wants to be and how much it reminds him of Finland, because it's, it's, I guess, closest thing that we have to Finland in the US, as far as environment wise. So he is very big on, he wants to stay there. They want to keep him. I think they would move him because let's not forget the Angels run the team. So nobody is untouchable when you're on a team run by Danny and Austin Ainge. But it's going to be bowl us over with an offer. If you're Detroit and you want him, you better come with a bunch of draft picks, and you can't be holding guys like Ron Holland and that off the table. Like, we need to have a real conversation about that. So that's where that one's at. And then Zach LaVine I'm not going to say the Kings are just going to give him away, but Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Kiana, it's going to be, hey, make us a real offer and we're going to go. It sounds like Scott Perry, who's running the front office now, finally is in at least somewhat of a position where he's kind of got Vivek Ranadive, who is very involved. And ESPN just had a story about he pushed them to sign DeMar DeRozan just so he could walk them to their courtside seats at Summer League. Like, that's, ridiculous. And this is why you're terrible and, playing awful. But it sounds like Scott Perry's in a position where he's kind of got him on, hey, you got to let me do my thing here. Like, we can't be going crazy. I'll add Sabonis to that list. That one's going to be a little harder because the contract is big and it's got a couple extra years left on it. But I think the Kings are going to be one of the more active teams here leading up to the deadline, because I think they're in a position where they know, all right, we're really bad and there's no hope of this group getting it back together. We need to start moving some of these guys out.
All right, we'll finish with this one. The name that we're not thinking about as a collective NBA audience that you think has a chance to move before February 5th?
It's a good question. I would say I would keep a real eye on the Clippers. If the Clippers decide, all right, we've pushed, they're playing pretty good lately. Like, and they've had a couple losses recently, but they've been playing pretty good ball. But if we're like, let's say 2 more weeks from now, and it is like, man, like I know we don't have our pick, but like, are we really going to push to go? They could look at it and say, all right, can we get something for Kawhi? What happens if we put James Harden out there? They have like no money on their books except for Vitsa Zubac over the next couple of years. They are set up to either hard reset this offseason or next offseason. And I think they could kind of move that process. One other team I'm going to just put a pin in, the Miami Heat. They could go a number of different directions. They could either try to add, or the Heat could say, you know what, let's slow it down a little bit this year. Let's take a little bit of a step back. We have our pick. Let's kind of see what this looks like. And maybe that means moving on from a guy or two. And we're, we could, because it's the East, we'll still be in the play-in tournament, but we're not going to really push too hard, and we'll just reset the roster a little bit. And then last, I know you asked for one, and I'm giving you more teams than names, but Orlando, something's a little bit off with the Magic. I don't think we're going to see them do any big blockbuster moves. And this might be more of, if you hear some Magic-related stuff involving one of the bigger salary guys leading up to the trade deadline, just file it away and come back to it in June and July. Because if they are a first round out and it's non-competitive or anything like that, or just they don't make any kind of playoff run, that team is way too expensive in a place where they've paid the tax before, but they don't want to be dealing with aprons and other stuff. They don't want to be that expensive unless they're pushing for the finals. And there's going to be probably first will come a coaching change, and then I think you'll see them make some other moves. But there's, I think we're going to see the trade deadline have movement. I don't know that we're going to see superstar blockbuster movement beyond wherever you fall in this Trae Young trade, but I do think you're going to see things set up for what's going to be a busy summer. If we don't get it now, we're going to get a ton of movement in the summertime, because teams like the Lakers and the Clippers have cap space. And when those teams have flexibility to play with, it's, there's going to be all kinds of movement happening.
All right. I know you're going to be on top of all of it, and instant updates and pieces available for all these trades that happen over the next less than a month here. Keith, great work. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right. My thanks to Keith. My thanks to everybody at SpotTrack for their great work. Lots of articles flying up and down the chain on a daily basis, including plenty of NFL pieces for me this time of year, and plenty more to come even later this afternoon. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the SpotTrack Podcast.